In this tutorial I'm going to show you how to make this really rather unusual little bag. It's quite roomy on the inside, but it looks quite small. So that means if you're going to a special occasion and you want a more dainty evening bag, but you still want to take lots of things with you, there's plenty of room inside there. It fastens actually with a magnetic snap, and the little covered buttons there are just decorative, and it's actually very simple and quite fun to make as well. So I've left all of the cutting instructions and your fabric requirements in the description box underneath the video. So let's get sewing. So I've got my two outer pieces. On the wrong side of these I've fused my G700 or your interfacing, whatever it is you're using. There are two lining pieces, and as you can see in the instructions, those are cut slightly deeper. I've got two pieces for my handles, and then these four pieces are going to make up the tie, or the faux tie that goes on the front of the bag. And I'm also going to use two self-covering buttons, so I've got a couple of scraps of fabric to cover those with as well. We'll do that later on. So the first thing we're going to do is to sew the tops of the outer pieces to the tops of the lining pieces. So these are right sides together, and I'm just using the edge of the foot of my sewing machine as my seam allowance, which is around about 1/4 inch. It doesn't have to be exact as long as all of those seam allowances are uniform. So that's the first piece, and then we'll do just the same with the second pieces here. These two sections are then going to go right sides together, and I'm going to match the seams at the sides. So to make sure they're matched, I'm just going to pop a pin in there, and I'm going to make sure the seam allowance goes towards the lining. So let's just match those up together, pin in here, and the same on this side. And then we're going to sew all the way around. So got a piece of lining fabric caught there. So all the way around the bottom, all the way around the lining, and I'm going to leave a gap in the bottom of about 4 inches or 10 centimeters, so I can turn this the right side out. Then let's square the corners. So we'll do this on all 4 corners. We're going to open out the corner so that the side seam sits right on top of the base seam. And you can feel when those meet. I'm going to push the seams in opposite directions, so the base seam's going that way, the side seam's going that way. And I'm going to pop a pin in here. Then I'm going to measure 1 inch or 2.5 centimeters from the point and draw a line straight across. That's from the point of the seam here, not from the edge of the fabric. And we'll sew straight across that line. And then chop that off with about 1/4 inch or 6mm seam allowance. So the same on the second lining part here. When it comes to moving the seams, I've already squished the base seam in that direction, so I'm going to do the same on this side. You can open that up so the two pieces meet. Measure my 1 inch from the point and then sew straight across. And then we can cut straight across. And we're going to do that on all 4 corners. And then we'll turn the whole thing the right side out. It's actually quite a quick bag to make, this one, but it does look rather complicated, I think. Let's push out those corners, which are nicely squared now. And then with the gap in the bottom, you could leave this on the side if you wanted to, but I normally tend to leave my gaps in the bottom. I'm going to close that just on my sewing machine. If you wanted that to be completely invisible, then you could use a ladder stitch and sew that by hand. And then we'll push the lining inside the bag. Now, because the lining was that little bit longer, you're going to have a border around the top. So I think it's going to be quite nice if we iron that in place and then top stitch all the way around. Just make sure that's nice and even, so it's the same width of border all the way around. It looks like a piece of bias binding, doesn't it now? It's a nice touch. And then we'll sew, I'm just going to sew on the orange bit and we'll top stitch that all around. So let's make up the straps. So again, I've put my interfacing onto the wrong side of the strap. And I'm just going to iron the long sides to the centre, so I'll press this first to crease the centre mark. And take the long edge to the centre and press. The second side to the centre and press. Just so the two long edges meet like this. If you find that your fabric wants to fight back a little bit and it keeps opening up like this, you can always use something like a best press or a spray starch and just add a little bit of stability to it. Helps to keep the crease. So now let's fold all of this in half again. You see how it just stays there when it's been starched or sprayed? You probably get the same result if you damped it a little bit with a spray of water actually. This happens to smell very nice as well. And then I'm going to stitch down both sides. And there I've got my 2 straps. So now I'm going to take my bag and I'm going to mark the center point by folding it in half, and I'm just using an erasable ink pen to mark that, although that doesn't really matter because you're not going to see this section when the bag's finished. Then I'm going to take my ruler and I'm going to measure 4 inches from each side, or 10 centimeters. Just chop that little thread off there. So we'll take this point and we're going to fold it towards the center at a slight angle, and I'm going to stop 1 inch from the center, so that's 2.5 centimeters from the center, and I'm just going to pop a pin in there. And the same on this side, so again take that 4 inch 10 centimeter mark, bring it towards the center, stop 1 inch or 2.5 centimeters from the center. Make sure those are looking the same, so they're at the same angle and they look symmetrical. And we'll have another pin in here. Then we'll turn it over and do the same on the second side. So again, take your 4 inch mark, bring it forward to 1 inch away from the center. And these should match up now, so the front looks the same as the back. Although you don't see the both at the same time, so don't worry too much about that. And the same with this side. So again, these 2 pieces are symmetrical. Then we'll take the strap and we're going to push this inside. And pin it. Make sure it's not twisted, and just pop it inside again on the opposite side. Turn it over and do the same with the second strap. So into that section there, and pin it. Then I'm going to make sure these are both the same length and not twisted. That one goes in here. Get it nice and straight and pin it. Then I'm going to sew across here, so across the top of the seam, and then just down the side a little bit like so, just to hold that in place. And then the same on this side, so across here through all layers, down a little bit, across and down a little bit. We've got quite a narrow opening, so make sure you're not sewing through the fabric underneath. And I'm just going to sew about 1 inch or so just along the side. So that's now sewn in place. So across there and just down there. So I find on this side it's easier to do it kind of upside down. Like so. And then we'll do the same on this side. So now the straps are well and truly sewn in place. So now let's put the little tie over the side. So I've used the contrast colour of the lining here. If you're going to use a patterned fabric or a fabric that has a right and wrong side, place these right sides together. And to do all 4 of these at the same time. And I'm just going to cut at a 45-degree angle straight the way across. So I'm using my little ruler with the 45-degree line here. Draw a line there. Same on this corner. And then we'll cut that off. So I've got 2 points. And then I'm going to sew all the way around this, apart from a gap in one side, so I can turn it the right side out. So put the accessory compartment back on again now. And then we'll turn this the right side out and press it. So I'm just going to snip off the corners on the pointy bits just to make them a little bit more pointy. And turn this the right side out. So I'm going to use a point turner and just push those points out. And into the other end. And then let's press this. Just fold the edges of the turning under, and then when I top stitch, that's going to close the opening. So there we go. Then I'm going to top stitch all the way around the edge. And I've done that with both pieces. Now before we actually put those on, if you wanted to fit a magnetic snap to the top of the bag, then of course you can do. I've already put 1/2 on here, because this, although that's quite ugly there, is the bit where this is going to cover over, so you're not going to see it. So that's an option for you. If you wanted to do that, that's absolutely fine. Let me just fit this to the other side. So I've marked the center point at the top here. I'm going to pop my snap over the top, the same distance from the top as the opposite side, and then very carefully with a sharp pair of scissors or your quick unpick, we're going to snip into those lines. Make sure these holes aren't too big, because you will have a big hole with not a lot you can do about it. Imagine it's going to be covered up, so don't worry too much. And then push those through, and the back of the snap goes on the back there. So now my bag will close if I want it to. So it's not imperative, but if you wanted to do that, then that's fine. So next thing we're going to do is to add the ribbon here. Now, because we've got a snap on, we've got to be very careful as to where we're going to sew this, because I don't want to sew over the snap itself. So let's fold this in half. And I don't want to see the stitches from the top. So I'm going to open this up, and I'm just going to sew across the inside. So I can either sew very close to the top or just underneath the snap. I'm going to go very close to the top. So let me just pin that in place actually. So figure out where you want it to be. Do you want both of those tabs to be the same length or one slightly longer than the other? That's up to you. Line them up to the top of the bag there, open it up, and we'll just have a pin to hold that in place so I know where it's going to go. And then I'm going to sew really close to the edge here. Now you could glue this, it doesn't have to be sewn on the sewing machine if you don't want it, or you could hand sew it if that makes it a little bit easier. I'm going to move my needle right over to the left hand side and just sew very close to the top of the strap. I'll show you this in just a second. So I've gone straight across the top here. If you are a little bit close to that magnetic snap, then put the zipper foot on your sewing machine. Okay, then let's do the same with the opposite side. So again, choose how you want those to look. I kind of like it with one a little bit longer than the other, to be honest. I'll just snip those ends off. Match those up to the top of the bag. Just open that and hold it in place while I secure that with a pin. And then I'm going to sew this again very close to the edge. Like so. So the final thing I'm going to do just to finish this off is to put a button on here, and I'm using a self-covered button. These are the Millwood ones. So I'm going to hold this in place actually with just a little bit of glue in the centre, because they do tend to slip, and I'm going to cut my fabric to about 1/2 inch or a centimetre or so larger than the button all the way around. That doesn't have to be a perfect circle. Some of these buttons will come with a template, which makes it easy, so you know the exact size of the fabric that you need to cut for the button. So I'm just using a little bit of glue to help to hold that, because you do tend to find these are very slippery. And then we're going to fold all the edges of the fabric in, and the spikes on the inside of the button grip onto it, like so. Make sure these edges are nice and smooth and tight around the button. And then we'll take the back of the button, place it over the shank in the centre. Oops, that's the wrong way around. That's it. And then just clip it. And that, whoops, that's your button finished. And these I'm going to hand sew just to the centre here on each side of the bag. And then one final little tip for you, because even though this is sewn in place across the top and the button's sewn on there, it will still flap around a little bit. So I'm going to take some of my Gutermann HT2 glue, which is a really strong fabric glue, and I'm going to put a little bit of glue just underneath those two pieces to hold them down, and then lift this up, and I'm going to put some glue over the top of that snap, and then just coming down the bag a little bit just to hold all of that in place. You can glue this all the way down if you wanted to really hold those down. That's entirely up to you. But I just don't want that lifting up, so you're kind of exposing the fastening underneath there. So I've done the same again on both sides. So I think you've got a really unusual little bag that actually looks quite complicated to make, but I think it's really quite effective, and it's not too big, so it's an ideal type of bag for going out in an evening, or if you don't have very much that you want to take out with you. So I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you enjoy making yours, and I can't wait to see your pictures if you want to pop them on my website onto Facebook. I shall see you again very soon. Bye bye.